Hello and welcome back to What's Your History, the podcast that covers all areas of history, heritage and archaeology, no matter how big or how small, how well known or how niche. Today's guest was Caitlin Sumner, who is an author of The Last Winter Rose. She spoke with me at a castle, which was very lovely to be on site in a castle, and she told me all about her interest in Richard III, being part of the Richard III Society, and why she wanted to write this novel. And so I hope you enjoy. Hello, Caitlin.
Hi.
Welcome to this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's fine. So I'm just going to pretty much jump into it about your book and ask, why did you want to do a story about Richard III?
It was something that I sort of grew up with. I homeschooled, so my school curriculum was very broad. And because my mother loves English history and English everything, there's a lot of English history included. And I also came to England when I was 6, and we went to Middleham and all these different places where Richard lived and all this stuff. So it was sort of always a bit of a background thing. And inspiration just sort of struck, and I started writing.
Brilliant. Well, it's good when little things like that inspire loads of different creations. Like, I know there's a lot of other people out there who do the same sort of thing. So while you were going gallivanting, seeing all the Richard sites, what was the one that stuck out to you the most?
Well, I don't really remember most of the visits from when I was young, but I think Middleham definitely is the one that stuck. I remember going back in 2009, and I'd just been out for a drive with some friends, and we stopped, in this little village, and my friend's mom said, "Do you want to go and look at the castle?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And my friend and her dad stayed in the car, and we went up, and we were crossing the bridge into Middleham, and I just sort of went, "I know this place. I know what's going to happen if I walk through this archway and look to the right. I'm going to see a statue." And it was because I had this vague memory, but I didn't know where it was from or what it was. And not really any way to articulate to my mother, where is this statue that I vaguely remember? So that was fun. So that was the first time I had been in about 15 years. And then I went back last year when I was just about a year ago when I was working on the book, and spent the day at the castle going around sort of reconstructing it in my head so I could know sort of what I was doing when I was writing it.
So your book is a work of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
How much research did you have to do to make it sound like you'd stepped into that time?
I did a reasonable amount. Definitely not as much as some people do with their books, because I wasn't looking so much for the exact historical accuracy of events in day-to-day minutia, because it's much more of a story about Richard as a person, and it's more emotional and human oriented. So I did research insofar as finding out when events happened with as much accuracy as possible, where he was at certain times of his life, not necessarily where he was on this day of this month of this year. That was a bit far. So I already had a general overview of the Wars of the Roses. I actually did it as a project for one of my classes in university, so it's always been in and out of my life, early school, university level, go away from it for several years, come back to it. So I read a bunch of different overview books, some specifically about Richard, one specifically about Edward, sort of get a broad idea of everything that was going on in a general sense, to make it as broadly accurate as possible. But because it is fiction, obviously there's some creative license, especially around events that there isn't really a set time that we know for sure this was happening. Like, nobody knows for sure exactly when Richard's son was born. It's sort of, there's a bracket of about 4 years. It's like, so I picked a year.
Yeah, that tends to happen as well, unfortunately. It's interesting that his son's not known about, because it tends to be boys that tend to be written about anyway. And with the fact that he is a royal as well, it's surprising that there's not that much information.
It's interesting, actually. This is vague from somewhere, probably one of the podcasts I listened to, is that apparently when they were young, they didn't actually do much recording about royal princes or sons of royals, that kind of thing, until they were about 14, I think. So you got a lot more records about the girls, and I remember it was because if they died, they sort of kept them hidden away and away from the public, everything, until they were of an age. That I found that really interesting. I honestly don't remember which one of the numerous things, because I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts as well, because sometimes it was just easier to listen to it than try and get through the stuff on the page. But yeah, that was very interesting, because there's not a lot about the younger lives of either of Edward's sons, the two princes, because they were, shipped off to different castles at the age of 2 or 3, raised by other people. But a lot about all the girls, so it's just a lot of different things. But yeah,
that in itself is really interesting, because normally women are the ones that don't get written in history, and the fact that it's the other way around, where people know about the princesses, but not the princes. That's very interesting.
In that particular type of situation with royal family, that seems to be more the case. I mean, I don't know if that was the case with a lot of sort of higher ranking nobles, or if it was just that specifically. But apparently, in that particular time period, at least, that was something that they did.
So I'm assuming when you tried to get a bit more of like the personal side of Richard, it was a bit harder to find out about him as well, if there was barely anything written.
There are a lot of gaps, which make it difficult. And because so many of the records were destroyed, a lot of it is second or third hand and conjecture based on that. And those may have been based on conjecture because they're written by people who may have been close to contemporary but never actually met him. So it was quite hard to find sort of what you might call a real picture of it. I just sort of let it form as it wanted to form, really.
So in a way, you had like Richard on your shoulder going, yeah, I did this as well, obviously in this imaginary world, but...
Kind of. My writing is not technical. I mostly write what comes. There's broad strokes of, here's the timeline, this happens here and here, these people are born here, these people die here, etc. But for the most part, I just let it develop by itself. And honestly, sometimes, some days, it does feel like the characters have just run away with me and I'm just hitting the keyboard and I have no say in anything. So it's an interesting way to write, and I think not enough people talk about that, because you always see, plan scenes out down to and it's like, well, no, I don't work like that. My best friend works like that, but I don't, and I do know a lot of people actually that are like that. They write what comes to it, and if they need to tweak it later, they'll tweak it later.
So is this your first book that you've brought out?
No, technically this is my second full-length book. I have 2 others also that are, one sort of novella length and one's short story length. So, and then I have another short story. Technically this is my 5th publication, if you want to be very particular about it.
And are your other works also historical fiction?
Yes. The first book that I wrote is set during the empire of Alexander the Great, and the novella and short story are tied into that. They're basically the same story told from different points of view, which is why they're shorter. And then the other short story is just like a small look at a life of somebody who lived in the early 1800s. It's just, I don't really talk about that one. It's just there.
Fair. So what actually made you want to do historical fiction then?
An overwhelming love of history since I was about 4, I suppose. I always enjoyed writing. I started writing probably when I was about 9, I want to say. I learned to read quite late by most people's standards these days. I was about 7 when I learned how to read, but it was not really a process. It was a one day I couldn't, one day I could, and that was it. Off I went. And then I was just reading constantly, and fairly soon after that I started writing. I remember one of the first things I did was, for school, I did a fake newspaper article about the discovery of Skara Brae on Orkney, because I had been there and I remembered it and I wanted to write about it. And my mother was very impressed because I was about 9 or 10. And then it just sort of went from there, and I just sort of kept writing little bits here and there. And I started the original book when I was about 16, and it took me about 8 years to write. So I've definitely gotten faster, because this book took me about a year.
Yep, that's definitely fast indeed.
Actually, it took me 8 months. So yeah, it definitely, I think it definitely wanted to be told a lot more. And I also am now at the point where I don't have to keep going back and revising my writing technique because it's solid now, whereas before it was still evolving. So there were so many redos of the original book that it got to the point where I finally just had to put it on my shelf and say, you know what, this may not be my best thing. I was young when I wrote it. It'll have to be as it is, and that's it. I have to stop worrying about it now. So
at least you've got something out there. There's many people out there that are aspiring to be writers, and it's still at the stage of just being on their computer, unfortunately.
Yeah, I follow so many people on Instagram. It's really fun to see people working on their projects, and especially when they get to the stage where they are ready to whatever they want to do. If they want to send query letters, if they want to self-publish, it's really great. I know 2 or 3 people who I've been following for few months who are just putting their things out these next couple of months too, and it's been really cool to see all that happening. And I love seeing people succeeding at it as well, because it is daunting, especially if you're self-publishing, because then you have to do everything yourself.
Would you ever consider doing an actual historical book rather than just historical fiction?
I don't know. That's sort of a case of ask me in 10 years, because right now I don't, probably not, because by academic terms, I am not a good historian because I become biased very easily. And I take sides in historical things. So I don't think I have that objective neutrality that I could write an actual history book. And also there are so many out there that it sort of seems like, well, what's the point of another one? It's just going to say the same things in slightly different language. At least with fiction, if somebody comes at you about something, you can say, well, that's why it's fiction. Sorry, but it's fiction.
I'm assuming you have picked a side, though. I'm assuming you're Team Richard and
Team York. I don't think I ever picked. I think it's just always been because of my mother. Yes, we grew up Yorkists. Plus, I have done many generations worth of genealogy. So the English side of my mum's family is all from Yorkshire. So it's just kind of there.
That's fair. Are you thinking of doing any more books within this series, like maybe talking about his brothers, or maybe even talking about his wife, or something like that?
Well, bit spoilery, but yeah, I am planning one other book, yeah, in relation to events. But that's all I'll say for the moment.
That's perfectly fine. So, to anybody who has been listening to this podcast, I'm sorry if it's been a bit on the noisy side. We are currently sat in a castle.
A lovely castle.
Yes, a very lovely castle, and we thought it might be a bit fun. So you are part of the Richard III Society, and they brought you here recently.
Yes, we did a trip here in June, I believe. We tried to do, the local branch tries to do outings once a month. I'm not entirely sure what happened with July. I might just have missed it. But the end of next week, we're going to Barnard Castle as the outing, where I've also been, but it'll be fun to go again because it was interesting. That was another place where Richard spent some time, and it does actually appear in the book at one point, because I found that out when I visited at Christmas with some friends, and I spent a lot of time wandering around, again, reconstructing it in my head to see what was what and what I could say and do, and that was a lot of fun. So that's going to be that. And then there'll be I don't know what our branch is planning to do for September, because it's the Society AGM in York, so I'll be at that as well. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'll have a table there with my books, so anybody who wants to buy a book at the AGM, I will be there.
You are also going to be at the Battle of Bosworth this weekend.
I am going to the Bosworth Festival, yes. Unfortunately, I did not get a table, but I am putting the books in the back of my car, so they'll be there. But yeah, apparently people sign up the previous October, so they weren't able to get me a space this year. But we're going anyway. My friend and I have decided that medieval festivals are our thing, so we're going down. It's going to be fun.
Not wrong with that. I like a medieval festival.
Yeah, it's good. We went to there was a small one with like a living history society at Greystoke a couple weekends ago. So that was fun. A bit different, but they did battle reenactments and it was fun. So it was a good day. So that was she sort of turned to me and went, "We're going to Bosworth, right?" And I said, "Yes, we are." So even when I found out I wasn't going to get a table, and I sort of was like, "I don't care. All right, we're going anyway." So it'll be fun.
Yeah. So when you're doing your research and stuff like that, do you go into reenactments? Do they help? Because it might help in like the more the battle side, or do you not even mention battles?
Honestly, I have never really been to like a full-size reenactment. This is going to be the first time I'm going to Bosworth, which, from the looks of past years and pictures and stuff, is pretty big. So it's going to be different. I do mention a couple of the battles, the names of which I now can't remember, of course. But I tend to not go particularly into them. I sort of skirt the actual action and sort of like have a before and an after. I'm not Bernard Cornwell. I don't do the high action battle sequences.
No, that's fine. There's loads of like action based books out there. We don't necessarily need more action books, which they're fine if you like that sort of genre and everything. But me personally, when it comes to my history, like I'm more the kind of thing. I like the personal side of it. Like, what did they think? What would they be going through their mind in this particular moment, and things like that. That's what's more interesting to me, is the more personal side.
Yeah, that is my largest complaint about how they did time passage in season 1 of House of the Dragon. Is you have none of that. You just have somebody's killing somebody, somebody's killing somebody. Where's all of the interesting interpersonal stuff? So yeah, I like that kind of aspect to anything really, where there's more. It's more about people than necessarily things, and that, for me, that goes across any genre: fantasy, history, historical fiction, historical adaptations like TV shows, whatever. It's like people are interesting.
So yeah, being part of the Richard III Society and things, I'm sure you're kind of sort of in the loop with all the research and stuff that's going on, especially the newest thing that came out last year, about the Princess in the Tower.
Yeah, I have had the book since release day and I still have not gotten a chance to read it. But I have been to the lecture that sort of details what they found, and the Missing Princess Project has been going for 6 years now, I think, looking for evidence that they were still alive after Richard was killed at Bosworth. And they found some fairly compelling stuff in old archives. I think the big one that they found may have been from an archive in Belgium. I'm not entirely sure exactly, but they've found records over in Europe that Henry wasn't able to get to and destroy as part of his charming campaign. The issue is always going to be that historians in general are skeptics of everything. So it's never going to fully resolve any of it, because for everybody that says, oh, this is great, this evidence proves that Richard wasn't a murderer because they were still alive, and there are going to be 10 people going, it doesn't prove anything, it's fake, it's da 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 da. Mm. So, I mean, I certainly never believed that he had done what they said. It just didn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. If you stop and look at it logically, it's never going to make sense. Because if you just break it down into the simplest terms, all of the children were illegitimized after Edward died, and Richard became king as a result. And then when Henry invaded and killed Richard, he wanted to marry Elizabeth of York, the oldest daughter of Edward IV.
Which legitimized, I can't even say the word, made her official again.
Which, because she was illegitimate, marrying her didn't actually get him any closer to the throne. So he had to make sure that she was legitimate, which then would legitimize all of her siblings, which means both of her brothers were now actually the next in line for the throne. So he had to cover up the fact that they weren't actually dead. So, yeah, Tudor propaganda is big and widespread and vaguely comparable to modern day propaganda. If anybody thinks that propaganda 500 years ago wasn't anywhere near as thorough and widespread as the stuff you get today coming out of some of the countries, think again, because it was a big thing.
Yeah, and again, like you said, if you think about it logically, you've got to ask the questions and stuff of like, well, if these children weren't princes and they were killed and stuff, why would all the documentation disappear? Why would Henry need to get rid of all that?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not Richard who was getting rid of all this.
No.
It was Henry getting rid of all this.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't, if you do think of it from a logical standpoint, it's like, well, what would Richard have to gain from his nephews being dead? And I know the whole idea is he wanted to become king and everything, and he was king, but if his son hadn't died, then his son would have become king.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't have mattered about the other two.
It's always been the thing, is as soon as all of those children were illegitimized, they weren't any threat to him. And he still made sure they were all taken care of and kept safe and everything. So there's no reason for him to do anything to two small children who weren't a threat to anybody. But they were absolutely a threat to Henry.
Yeah, because they're the Yorkist blood, and even after Richard, even though those boys are still around, they are the next threat.
Yep.
Really. So
and they were, because they both led invasions, which Henry claimed were people claiming to be the princes, but they weren't actually. Well, actually, they were. And I mean, it's obviously there's never going to be massive concrete undeniable evidence, but we're getting pretty close. There's a lot of stuff that very much points. I mean, the one big thing that I think is very convincing is the document detailing weapons and troops for one of them to lead an invasion, supported by which one was she? Margaret, I think, of Burgundy. So Richard's older sister. So their aunt, and Maximilian, who was the Holy Roman Emperor. And like that's pretty convincing, since it mentions the prince by name and title.
Yeah.
So,
and like she said in the documentary as well, like even if these children weren't the princess, why would this woman fork out so much money to some pretender? It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
So I might be turning into a Ricardian, maybe. So thank you for being on this podcast, and thank you for talking about your book. Where can they find your book? Is it on Amazon and stuff? You said it is self-published?
Yeah, so it's self-published through Amazon. It is currently available to order as paperback, and on August 22nd, it will be available on Kindle. I'm undecided yet if I'm putting it on Kindle Unlimited, which is the subscription service. So if you can read any book that's available to that, sort of like a library. I may do it for a short time. But yeah, and I do want to set up at some point where people can order like personalized signed copies directly from me, but that's a ways away. But if anybody wants a copy like that, they're welcome to get in touch with me, email or social media.
Yeah, I'll put your social medias down in the links as well. Mm-hmm. And also, I suppose the other way that people can find you is by going to these different events and stuff like that.
Yeah, I will be at some of them. Probably next year I'll probably be at a lot more. I do need to drop a calendar of when different events are happening and what I want to go to, and make a plan about it, because it's all been very last minute this year, because I wasn't actually even going to publish it until August, and then I think I found out about, well, I had vaguely known about the Middleham Festival in the beginning of July for a couple of months, but about 3 weeks beforehand, I thought, well, I'm done with everything. I'm down to formatting. And I called, and I was just talking to the lady who, site manager, Jill, and she said, do you want a table? And I sort of blanked and then went, maybe? I spent an entire day formatting, and had it up and ready and ordered copies. And so I basically had an early debut at the Middleham Festival, where I could sell it to people. And it was sort of an advanced publication. It went a little crazy, but yeah, so the Kindle release stayed where it was supposed to, though. So it's out the 22nd.
Wonderful stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about your book and your writing process, and talking a little bit about the Richard III Society. Maybe more people might want to join it now that you've spoken a bit about. Who knows?
Yeah, but we could always, we're fun. We don't bite, and we could always use more people, and we could always use young people, because it's always been a touchy subject in school, and they don't ever teach it very broadly. So a lot of people come away from your general schooling with maybe about a quarter of what actually went on. So it's always good for people to know more about the time period, and then they're welcome to form their own opinions about it. But it definitely gets glossed over a lot. So that's I know that's one project that they definitely want to work on as a group, is getting more details of the time period out to the younger generations. And I think that's part of what is good about historical fiction, is because I feel like younger people are more likely to read it, and then they'll go, oh, this is cool. And then they'll go on and they'll do their own research into it on a more technical level.
Yeah. I can safely say that's been my case as well. Like, I read a book called Heresy, which is about Elizabethan England, but it's talking about a guy called Bruno. And since learning about that, I've wanted to know more about, more about him as he was a real person and stuff like that. And
Yes,
that was my little window into it.
I've read that actually. That's the one where there's several, aren't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I've read the first one. I don't think I ever got to the others, but it was interesting. I did enjoy it, and yeah, I have a lot of books like that where I've read something and then it's just branched off into a deep dive of the time period or the family or the Borgias definitely did that. But yeah, it's a good way to get it to people, and then if it piques an interest, then it just opens up so many doors. So
Thank you so much. And if you want to check out her stuff, I will link it all down below. I will link a link to the book as well. So thank you again for being on this podcast. And
thank you very much.
hopefully you have a nice time in Bosworth.
Thank you.